This is our homemade test tank, and this is how we're gonna go ahead and test these two Amazon pumps. So we have our 4-inch pump here, and we have our 3-inch pump here. Let's go ahead and get them in the test tank and see how they perform. The first pump we're gonna test should flow 30 gallons a minute, 207 foot maximum depth, and it should pull 5.2 amps. Let's test to see if it does that. The pump is currently sitting in the test tank right now, and we're gonna go ahead and turn the power on. So the pump is sitting here running. As you can tell, the water's pretty turbulent and it's doing its job. Our first test is going to be the amp test. It's supposed to read 5.2. Let's go ahead and see what it says. It's reading about 5.5, 5.6, 5.7. 5.6, so it's averaging out around 5.6 to 5.7. Now I'm sure you're wondering, how am I going to test how deep it can pump from? So the theory is a half a psi for every 1 foot of head. So if you hang a pump at 100 feet in the well, the pump is going to have to build minimum 50 psi just to get the water up from 100 feet. The average household pressure is an additional 50 psi, so you're supposed to be able to see 100 psi at the base of the pump. That's what your pressure will be when the pressure in the house is at 50 psi. So if I were to slowly close this valve, giving it false head pressure, we should see this gauge go up. We're going to slowly start cracking the valve and closing it and see what the pressure gauge does. So what we've done now, we have considerably decreased the flow, but we have increased the pressure. Let's go ahead and crack it a little bit more. So we are averaging around 70. Let's open it up a little. Give it a little more. So if you see the gauge is sitting at about 80 psi. Now if I were to close this all the way, this unit here is filled with pressure, trying to force it through, but it can't. So we're going to go ahead and open it some, and we're going to close it again. It went up to about 87. So if we pull this up and look at the flow, that's probably 4 to 5 gallons a minute. At only 70 psi. I think the maximum pressure that I'm realistically seeing here is 80. So let's talk about this. Okay. So the pressure we saw here was 80 psi. So what we're going to do, we're going to take 80 psi, and the typical household pressure is 50. So if you subtract 50 from 80, you're only left with 30 psi. It takes a half a psi to lift every 1 foot of water. So you're left with 30 psi. So if you have a half a psi per foot, at 30 psi, that's only 60 feet. This pump can only push water and satisfy the pressure switch from a maximum water level depth of 60 feet. Now, I'm sure that the pump can probably give you water at a deeper depth, but it's not going to satisfy the switch. So what that means is the pump will just sit down there and run and run and run and run, and it won't satisfy the pressure switch and be able to cut it off. So I'm going to say that this probably isn't a good pump to purchase if you plan on hooking this up to your house. Now, if it's a temporary setup, something where you just need water for like brick masons or something, construction around the job, maybe. Even if you put this in a cistern, in a very similar situation like this where it has no head, it's only going to give you 80 psi. I don't see the money value of this pump being worth it. Now, the quality of it, a 1 out of a 10, I give it a 3. It looks good. Everything about it says stainless steel, but I've noticed the casting on these units, and the casting looks like if that pump just fell over, it would break in half. For it being $150 roughly, it was $170 shipped to my door. It's just not worth the money spent on it for how it performed. The reason why I have a 200 psi pressure gauge here is because the half horsepowers that I've tested build upwards of 140. And the 3/4 horsepower that I tested, the ones that we install for our customers, they build upwards of 165. And the 5 gallon a minute deep set 3/4 horsepower pump that we sell, it pegs past the 200 psi. We estimated somewhere around 215 psi. So that means the pump that we sell is capable of putting 215 psi inside the pipe, which a lot of times it can blow the pipe up. I was kind of curious to see what a Amazon well pump would do in comparison to a pump that is roughly 3 times its cost. But for this thing to only give us a maximum pressure reading of 80 psi, that's really kind of sad. Test I'm going to go ahead and do is the amp draw under a load, and we're going to see if the amps of the electric motor actually increase. So we did our amp draw test. What we're going to do now is we're going to make the system seem like it's working against a pressure tank. So we're going to give it 50 psi roundabout. And we're going to do the same electrical test. So as per what they say it will do, it's supposed to be 5.2 amps. And we've currently got the system at around 50 psi, and it's pulling 6.1, 6.2 amps. So it's actually pulling 20% higher than what they said the normal run amp should be. So what will happen in this situation, the pump will eventually overheat and turn itself off. So where I have the pump set at right now, it's giving me about a half a gallon a minute. And I'm registering about 94 psi. 94 psi. So what that means is this pump theoretically isn't capable of being set any deeper than 100 feet. You could put it 100 feet in the well, and as long as your well makes plenty of water and you believe that the water level isn't ever going to drop past probably the 70-foot mark, then this pump would probably be fine. Longevity wise, I'm not sure what the lifespan of this pump is going to give you. I read many reviews online. It had a 2.6 out of 5-star rating for longevity. Many people said that they installed this pump, they were happy with the purchase, the packaging was nice, which I agree, the packaging was great. The supplies that came with it in order to install it was great. The literature that came with it was great. But longevity, you get a 50% rating out of longevity, and a lot of people are having these pumps die with anywhere from 5 months to a year. So you got to try to justify, is that really worth it? So at this point I've had it running for a little over 10 minutes, and if you feel the plumbing, it's hot to the touch. You put your hand in the water, I'm going to say that water is every bit of 130 degrees. I do not have a thermometer, but I wish I did because it's just that hot. let's go ahead and turn the power off and talk about it. Now I just took this thing out of the test tube here. The temperature of this is probably 150 degrees. It is scalding hot. I don't want to put my hand on it any more than that. So the reason for the last test, I left it at 50 psi for about 10 minutes. The reason for that simulation was, what if you're watering your lawn? You're watering your lawn, you have 2 garden hoses running, your pump is running continuously. So that's what this was doing. It was running continuously. Now, when you water your lawn, you can always go in your house and open up a faucet and you still have water. So what that means is you still have pressure on the system. I only had 50 psi on this. That would mean the water level in your well would only be at like 20 feet. And that's all the pump's having to do is lift the water 20 feet and then pressurize the house. That's kind of sad. I mean, if this was a contender with a box store brand pump, the pressures would be way up. So in a nutshell, would I recommend buying it? No. For the money, not even for the money. The reason why is the amount of effort you have to go into to replace a well pump. You don't want to have to do it again. Number one, will it flow 30 gallons a minute as stated? I believe so, yes. There's no need for me to even test that theory. The reason why I think that is, it's like a transmission in a car. A car will do 100 miles an hour, but that's in 5th gear. This thing will pump 30 gallons a minute in 5th gear. But a car has to have 1, 2, 3, 4 gears to get it to 5th gear. This thing is designed to pump volume. It is not designed to build pressure. I can't even think of any situation where you would want to use this pump other than a cistern. But that's just to move the water. That's strictly to pump it from a large cavity to feed something. Not really building much head. So the pump in my mind is kind of useless. Because it won't build pressure, because the amp draws are 20% higher than they should state, and the reviews online of people who have purchased them and have had bad failure in the past, I would not recommend buying the Hallmark 4-inch, 30 gallon a minute, 1 horsepower pump. I just wouldn't. Well, okay, time for round 2. Here we have the Hallmark 3-inch deep well pump. Let's go ahead and pop it in the test tank and see how this one performs compared to the 4-inch. Okay, so here we are with the 3-inch pump. We have it running. You can tell it runs a whole lot quieter than the 4-inch pump, which is nice. I went ahead and extended the downpipe here to where it didn't agitate the water as badly because this pump actually sits up a little bit higher. So let's go ahead first off and do an amp test. Now, with 0 pressure on the system and the pump running, the system is supposed to pull 4.6 amps. We come over here and it's pulling 4.2, so it's right in line. Let's go ahead and put some pressure on the system and see if these numbers change. Go ahead and start cracking the valve shut, and we're going to raise the pressure up to 50 and see what happens. Okay, we're at 50. At 50 psi, we're running 4.5 amps. So we're right in line with it. Max feet, it's supposed to pump from 247 feet. So roughly 50% of that value is how much pressure that this pump should be able to build. So we're looking at roughly 123 psi. Let's see if it'll do it. We're already at 50 and we have the valve about 50% closed. Let's go ahead and crank it down and see what happens. Making noises. You got close to it. 120. Not terrible. Let's go ahead and open it back up. Let it flow for a minute. Now, at first glance, both of these pumps seem to look pretty good. They have beautiful looking stainless steel heads, stainless steel bodies. But I noticed one thing when I took the screen off. When we come down here and we look at how things are cast, the casting just does not look exceptional, to say the least. It looks, I don't know, medieval? Now, the reason why I'm pointing this out is because I just noticed something, and I want to show it to you. So if we come back here to the 3-inch pump, let's go ahead and give it a little bit of back pressure. And we come down here right to the head of the pump. In the casting, do you see it? In the rope hole, do you see the problem? There's a hole in the casting. And if we allow water to flow, I actually got water weeping out of that crack a little bit ago. But that's a flaw in the casting and the design of this head. Oh, there we go. Weaving around the outer side of it. So there is a crack somewhere in that area, but there's also a visible crack right there. Now it's puddling up out of the hole. So if we close it off, that's just a failure point in the future. Now we're going to simulate as this pump is running at 100 feet and the water level's at 95 feet, and you've satisfied your pressure switch. So let's go see what the amps are now. So with the system under a load, it's pulling 4.9 amps, and the estimated run amps are 4.6. So that's not too terribly bad. So if we look at the maximum flow rate, it's rated at 13 gallons per minute. Now I went ahead and shortened the discharge pipe here. I would say that that's 13 gallons a minute. I've got it kind of cocked back to 50 psi, so the system's going to have to run with head pressure in order to give you your water. So yeah, I'll say that the system will do 13 gallons a minute. If we open it wide open, we have no head pressure, and it's probably flowing slightly more, but not much. Now, what I just noticed here, there's actually steam coming out of the water at this point. So this system is actually getting extremely hot. It's very hard to hold my hand on there for any more than about 3 seconds. But yeah, that water is extremely hot at this point. So these pumps are really getting hot doing their work. Now, down in a well, granted it's going to be 50 degrees, but the pump itself inside is still going to get hot. It's supposed to be cooled by the well water. We're not really transitioning any water here, so that's why it's getting hot. But it's getting really hot. Let's go ahead and turn the system off and we'll talk about both pumps. So you have your 3-inch and your 4-inch pump. Now the pros of these, they both flow what they state. The 4-inch pump flows 30 gallons a minute, and the 3-inch pump flows 13 gallons a minute. That's about it for the pros. I don't care how cheap these pumps are. I don't think they're going to last. The amount of effort and energy that it takes to change a well pump out, putting in a cheap product, you're going to get a cheap lifespan out of it. Now, the 4-inch pump, it pulls amp draw that is 20% higher than it's rated, and this pump is slightly higher I guess is 4.6 and it shows 4.9. I'll give it that. But when it came to the casting, the first thing I noticed with the 4-inch pump when I took the screen off prior to doing the test, I looked at it and it's really thin on the back side, and I thought to myself, if this pump ever would accidentally just fall over, I think it would break in half right here. Right at the seam, I think it would just break in half. So I came over here when I got to the 3-inch pump, and this thing's still scalding hot. This actually looks a little bit better on the bottom side of it. But then I was disappointed when I came to the top in the middle of the test, and I noticed there's a hole. There's a tiny little hole that has developed right there, and that's just sad. I didn't even really tighten the head fitting into it really tight. I just put Teflon tape on it and held it with my hand and tightened it with a pair of channel locks. So imagine if you really hunked down on that thing, that would probably crack. So do you want to sit there and wait 4 days like I did for a pump to show up at your doorstep? Put it in your well, and hey, you're all excited, it's working, and then 2 weeks later, boom, you pull it back out and you find, oh, the whole complete top head of the pump cracked. Then what are you going to do? You're going to wait 4 days for it to ship back to Amazon, get your money back, and then you're going to hire somebody else to do it. So, in a nutshell, would I buy them? No. Would I sell them to a customer? No. Would I recommend one over the other? Yes. I would recommend the 3-inch pump over the 4-inch pump, strictly because it has the capabilities of building 120 psi. So that means you could set that pump at 100 feet or 150 feet, and I believe it would actually work just fine. The problem being, at this point, I see this hole in the casting here. Who can say that you're going to get one that's any better or any worse than this one? So, in conclusion, it's a Hallmark pump, it's made in China, and Amazon sells it. Would I buy it? No. I'm here doing this review because I've had a half a dozen people who have purchased these, who have come here and asked for my help on this channel, and I thought it's time for me to buy them and do my own test, because I've tested my own at my office and I know what they're capable of doing, and these fall about 50% shy of what my smallest pump is capable of doing. So with that being said, I hope y'all like this video. I spent a little over $300 buying these pumps of my own money. I wanted to do an honest review just to get it out there for the viewers. So if you like the video, please give it a thumbs up. And if you haven't, hit that subscribe button. Until next time, thanks for watching.